Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you today.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Well, just recently there was an article out by a friend of ours, Eric Margolis, and he's an individual that we relied on for helping us sort things out because he's a real expert, and especially in the Middle East, and he still writes about foreign policy. And because he always tells the truth, guess what? He's been in trouble with the conventional media, so he has his own website, and you have published his articles on the Institute for Peace and Prosperity. But he has an interesting article out just recently dealing with the campaign, especially with Jeb Bush. But the title of his article is Republicans Can't Stand the Truth. They don't want to hear the truth. But the only thing is, and this is hardly criticism against Eric, but I think there's a lot of people who can't stand the truth. Democrats and the news media and a lot of American people, they just want to believe whatever they think sounds good. But anyway, he writes this article about the truth because he was motivated by Drumheller, who was a CIA agent, top-ranking CIA agent during the period of time prior to the run-up to war and during the war period, the early years against Iraq. And he was involved with the information, and he said it was all a lie. And so Drumheller just recently died, and this was the motivation he had to say, well, what was true and what wasn't, because if you study Drumheller, you will find out. And they knew, and what Margolis resents is that Jeb says, well, the war was fought because of faulty intelligence. They made mistakes. It was all their fault. The kind of thing that they pushed on to the Secretary of State, Tapao. But there's a lot more to it than that, and there's so many lies, I don't even know if we can cover all the lies that they told.
Well, yes, Tyler Drumheller was the head of the CIA's European division, so he was very high-ranking, obviously, and he was very critical of the information. He was particularly critical of this fellow who's now called Curveball. He's infamous as being the guy who was probably paid well. Margolis suggests maybe even a foreign intelligence asset from the Saudis or the Israelis or someone to tell them what they wanted to hear. And I think what's remarkable about Curveball is that it's not remarkable. We were just talking about how many other curveballs have there been.
In every war.
The first Iraq war, it was the ambassador's daughter who pretended to be a Kuwaiti, seeing babies killed. And we know that in Libya there were several curveballs saying that Gaddafi was about to kill his own people, and that turned out to be false. And who knows how many curveballs there are on Syria. So we're not learning much from this.
But Eric gives credit to the right source for this motivation of lies, these contrived lies. Of course, it goes to Dick Cheney. So Dick Cheney was very much involved. But they were involved in this international intrigue with the British. I mean, when it came to all the weapons of mass destructions and yellow cake and all these things. But Cheney was very much behind that, but it was international, and they knew exactly what they were doing. They were silencing the truth, and they were canning the information. This information, make the facts, make the facts conform to their theories.
Yeah. Well, Eric, as you know, was writing at the time and was critical at the time. He knows the region well. He spent a lot of time there. And one thing that he pointed out that I think is most interesting is that as soon as he started saying the wrong things about the war, he just disappeared from the media. They didn't call him to go on TV anymore. They canceled his columns. So if you think about that in a free society, someone who, in a supposed free media, who has a different view just simply is made to not exist. So therefore, any average person watching the news would think that there is no dissent at all.
And I don't think we learned anything afterwards that we didn't suspect or assume to be the case when we were working on this. But, the motivation for this is something else. How did they get the people to do it? What's so discouraging is it isn't the conservative Republican media, it's all the media that gets together and spews out the lie. But Eric's whole argument was that, the motivation behind all this was oil and military bases, imperialism, Israel. But you know, one other thing, how these lies spill over that really bothers me a whole lot was that evangelical Christians, you know, were supportive of the war. And his claim is, and he's probably right, he said 80% of, you know, evangelicals, I guess you should define the evangelicals, and this probably doesn't include them all, but 80% of the evangelicals were gung-ho over the war.
Yeah.
This,
It does make you wonder about information too. I mean, it'd be easy to just to blame them and say that's terrible, but they may not have looked. You know, you were on the internet all the time, and a lot of us were in the congressional office at the time looking for alternative sources. But some average person who's just watching TV, when they get rid of the Margolises of the world, and you only see, you know, mushroom cloud, it's hard to give them the full blame for this.
you know, and look how hard it is to reverse the lies. I mean, probably the majority of American people still believe that Saddam Hussein was really threatening us and had something to do with 9/11.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure they do.
Yeah, and it's real hard to change it. But you know, there's one thing that they did, and I think this was mentioned in the article, is that our government would torture people, and people, when they're tortured, sometimes admit to something. But dictators do this all the time. They torture people. You heard about it with the Soviets and others. Dictate them and confess, and then it's okay to put them in prison. But that to me is almost irrelevant. But there's some psychological thing that the governments feel better if we torture somebody and threaten them with death. Yeah, I did it.
Yeah.
Where it has any meaning, but they still did that, and that was used. You know, in this case, they've tortured. We have no idea how many people they tortured to get false confessions. You know, they said that this was the case.
Yeah, it's almost to legitimize what they're doing. But I think this is a real danger, and I think, you know, maybe it's a psychological problem that America has in facing the fact that the Iraq War was a lie. And I've said to you before, I think they're trying to rehabilitate the war, turn it into a good war so we can feel good about it. And this is the danger, and this is why we've discussed this several times on the show, because you can see this is what they're trying to do. Jeb Bush is saying it. We talked about it earlier. They asked Donald Trump who his top foreign policy advisor was. He said, I looked to John Bolton, and he's responsible for the lies too.
You'd think anybody with a little common sense would realize that an individual like Donald Trump would be very, very authoritarian, would quite willing to be using all this force and power. And I want to get into this exceptional book that is not a positive term, by the way, that Cheney just wrote. But all their predictions were so bad, but they never seemed to be discredited. Remember Wolfowitz, he was a promoter of this. He was a buddy Cheney, a big neocon. And he said it would cost about $60 million, and the others said it could be $500 million. And it costs $1 trillion. Did the oil pay for it? No, it didn't pay for it. But they were going to, get stability there and have this revolution and all these wonderful things, get rid of the bad dictators. And, even Israel was satisfied with this. We hate Saddam Hussein. But Saddam Hussein didn't like Al-Qaeda. They were sort of a block to radical, the Iranians, the radical, Islamists in Iran. And yet today, they got exactly opposite. Now, if their goal was chaos, maybe they're quite satisfied.
Great success.
But where is it? The oil right now, Iraq is not going to be producing oil, and maybe Iran's going to be producing oil. And of course, the government of Iraq is allied closer to Iran than ever before. And of course, it's such a mess over there. So the whole thing is a total failure. So you'd think they would have a little bit of remorse, and say, hey, maybe we overdid it. But that's one thing you got to give them credit for. The Dick Cheneys of the world, all the neocons, never give up. Yeah. They believe in this stuff. And what are they doing in this book? You're aware of the blurb on Cheney's new book written with his daughter. And this is scary stuff.
Yeah, I was on Target Liberty today, and as you say, he's absolutely shameless. It's astonishing. You almost admire someone who has the inability to reflect upon himself, I suppose. But he's calling for We need an America that has more proactive early action and a robust military force.
Yeah, and in that little blurb, which is short, they talk about power, 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 and America's responsibility. And some people gobble this up, and it gives me some concerns, because it looks like people are sort of a lot of them are drifting toward Trump, because he's saying, give me power, and I know how to do this, I know how to run things, and I can take 15 million illegals and I can throw them out of here in no time. I can build a wall and the Mexicans are going to pay for it. Yeah, just like the Iraqis paid for destroying their country. Yeah. So.
And then the whole issue, though, and it's with Cheney and with Trump and everything, they talk about we need to restore power, we need to restore our military. But where are they going to get the money to do it?
Yeah, they're always talking about that, you know. The word rebuilding. Well, when was it destroyed? You know, we're spending more money than most of the other countries put together, and we rule the world. But intellectually, we're not doing so well, and economically, we're not doing so well. So that can all be reversed, which cannot be canceled out just by the military. You know, the Soviets didn't lose their nuclear weapons when they collapsed. They still had their power. They could have bombed and killed a lot of people, but the whole thing disintegrated because it was a failed experiment. And I think we're on the verge of noticing that this failed experiment with the dollar reserve standard, which is a fiat dollar, and that you can run an economy, a worldwide economy, and you can militarize the world and demand that we be in charge and that we are the exceptional nation. I think it's coming to an end, and this big talk, but it's still utterly amazing to me how Dick Cheney and his daughter can write a book and talk about American exceptionalism and why we have this moral responsibility, and lying again. The people who told us all these other lies, and now they're saying that we are responsible and we must exert our power. They're talking about preemptive war, and they want to be proactive. Those are the words of a would-be dictator. And that is something we should be concerned about, because American people, we don't want to think badly about ourselves. I mean, why should we? But guess what? A lot of people around the world don't have a warm and fuzzy feeling about us, because in the last 20 years or so, we have actually bombed or invaded or really annoyed an Arab Islamic country. And even in the last several years, even Obama, who's our peace candidate, he's been involved in about 8 of them. So yes, we need to wake up. We need the truth. This is a great article by Margolis, who said that the war in Iraq was all based on lies, and he subtly at the end does warn us that it looks like it's happening, and we have to recognize you're not going to get the truth from either political party at this point, and you're not going to get it from the Washington Post or the New York Times or the Wall Street Journals, because they march lockstep. They're all pro-war, warmongers, and unfortunately the American people suffer. So the responsibility we have is try to present the truth in the best fashion possible and let the American people know that you cannot have peace and prosperity by warmongering and declaring that we can declare war and preempt any country that we desire. I think the argument comes from our Institute for Peace and Prosperity. You can find the answers there, because indeed, I believe that most Americans are pro-peace. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.